Okay, this morning I have a great opportunity to talk to somebody that's kind of a sneaky hero of mine. His name is Maurizio Giri, and he does a lot of things. He has his fingers in writing, in teaching, in software development, and just being one of the real wise men of the electroacoustic and synthesis world. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Maurizio. Hello, how are you?
Hello, fine, thanks. And you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a discussion. I'd like to start this off by asking you a little bit about your work. If you could tell me a little bit both about the work series, but also the device development that you do.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say that I teach music composition, instrumental music composition with paper and pen at the conservatory. And in the same conservatory, I also teach Max, electronic music techniques with Max. But my main course is the classical music teaching. I'm writing this book series, which is called Electronic Music and Sound Design, Theory and Practice with Max, with my friend and colleague Alessandro Cipriani. We already wrote 2 volumes of this series, and we are currently updating the 2 volumes to Max 8. And after that, we will try to finish the 3rd volume, which we are working on it since a few years. And we hope to finish it next year. Unfortunately, we don't have the same amount of time we had 15 years ago when we started to think about this work. Other than that, I am a developer of Max for Live devices and iOS apps under the label Amazing Noises, which is a label under which I produce my software.
Interesting. That's quite a load of stuff. Now, you say that the thing that you teach at conservatory is classical composition?
Yes, classical composition, harmony, counterpoint, orchestration. This was my main study. And then at the end of my study course, I developed an interest in the electronic music. First of all, I developed an interest in computer algorithms, not related to music at the first time. So I was fascinated by the computers. And then I joined the interests.
Sure. Well, that obviously then leads to Amazing Noises. Tell us a little bit about Amazing Noises and the devices that you're creating.
Okay. When Max for Live was announced, I saw it as an incredible opportunity to have the Max patches inside a DAW environment, very complex and articulated like Ableton Live. I didn't know Live very well at the time, but I immediately bought a copy and started to experiment. I began to publish, I think, 213 some free devices, which I thought would be interesting for people. Then I decided to go commercial, and I tried to sell something, and there was a good response. And after a while, I was called by Ableton, by Christian Klein of Ableton, who told me that he was very interested in my production, if I was interested to publish my devices in their store, and of course I was very interested. At the moment, I have I think 4 packages plus the creative pack, which is a free one in collaboration with Ableton. At the same time, I am collaborating with another friend of mine, which is a musician and a great programmer called Alessandro Petrolati, and we work together to develop an iOS audio application. In this case, I write the audio part in Gentilde, then I export it in C++, of course, and Alessandro takes my code and creates the interface, the control part. He has developed a wonderful framework. So it's a very fun way to work because I can concentrate on what I like more and leave the rest to my friends.
That actually sounds like a great way to do it because you get to really embrace the things that you're great at and let somebody else take it over. That's really smart.
Yes,
now you have a very deep knowledge about both music and technology, which is obvious. I mean, you're literally writing the book about Max and Max programming. Your series is one that I often recommend to people because it's comprehensive, but it's very understandable. So that's a fabulous tool. But also you're doing this amazing work developing Max for Live devices and now iOS applications.
Yes.
I'm wondering, what is your background and how did you get to be this combination of teacher, writer, artist, programmer, developer, all of these kinds of things? What is the background that allows you to do all of these things?
Okay, first of all, it's a very long background. It goes in the 80s of the last century. So, as I said, when I was studying composition, I was fascinated by the computers. It was the Commodore 64 time, and at first I couldn't afford a computer, so I only bought books on programming, and I program with paper and pen and try to create my algorithms. Then I finally could afford Commodore 64, and I started to make programs that generates sequence of MIDI events, because at the time it was not possible to have a real-time audio at home in the mid 80s. Right. So my first program, a series of programs, was about cellular automatas, which I programmed using a language which was called Forth, which is not very used by now. And I also use assembly because otherwise I couldn't be very precise. And so my first electronic music pieces were these crazy sequences created with cellular automata and played by DX7. And then in 1990, I participated with a poster on my cellular automata program in the 90s on an Atari to the Colloqui di Informatica Musicale in Genoa. This is a sort of Italian equivalent of the International Computer Music Conference. Okay. And this is important to me because in this same conference there was Kurt Lipp and Zach Setter with a paper of their unbelievable IRCAM musical workstation, which was basically the Max programming language installed on incredible futuristic Nextcube computer with a super powerful audio card. So it was with all this stuff which costs thousands and thousands of dollars. It was capable of real-time audio processing, and I remember I asked Zach a lot of questions about this environment, which I found very fascinating. In the next 2 years, I bought a Mac Classic, which was very cheap for a Mac at the time, and Max 2 point, I don't remember. And I started to program Max. In the electronic music field, I am a sort of a self-taught, to be honest, because I took some unofficial lessons when I was a student of composition with the teacher of electronic music in my conservatory. And then I bought a lot of books and tried to figure out how everything works, experimenting, changing. Try to do by myself everything, and in a certain amount of time I think I have a few knowledge here and there about the matter. And the kind of music I liked at the time was of electronic music was the avant-garde electronic music, like the one produced by Ligeti, Xenakis, Stockhausen, Steve Reich, Berio, Maderna, and so on. And later I expanded, of course, my interest to non-strictly classical musicians like Alvanotto, Keda, Aphex Twin, Otekro, Matmos, and so on. These are my interests.
I'm curious, though. You started doing cellular automata on a Commodore 64 and using that to create MIDI. It seems to me like you would have had to be curious about weird music in order to do that. You know?
Yes.
How did you... I can understand once you get into composition and learning about electronic music, becoming fascinated with Xenakis and some of these folks, but where did your ears come from for that when you were just starting? What were your musical interests when you started programming?
Avant-garde music, instrumental avant-garde music.
Even then?
So, yes. Well, I became a student of composition because I was very fascinated by contemporary music and also jazz. I forgot to say, I played jazz piano with a quartet at the time, and I liked very much the giants of jazz like Coltrane, Dolphy, Mingus, you name it, and also free jazz, experimentation. I liked very much the Ornette Coleman rhythmic experimentation in odd times. And also, yes, when I was a boy, I listened to a lot of music, also prog rock, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis, King Crimson, my idols. Before using a computer, I have listened to a lot of contemporary music.
That really explains a lot, and especially that I've noticed this among many people, which is that more avant-garde jazz tends to be the way a lot of people's ears get opened up to be able to hear all kinds of avant-garde music and all kinds of new music styles. It's like jazz is almost an entryway into much more experimental music. Yes,
I agree. It's a key to open a world of sounds, and I agree.
Right. One area I want to ask you about is about your development of this book series, because again, I find it such an important part of the canon of electronic music right now. How did you go from seeing Kurt and Zach with the Earcam workstation to becoming a strong enough programmer or feeling confident to be able to write probably the most detailed book that's been written about Max? What was that path like?
It was a long path. First of all, I worked, as I said, in collaboration with Alessandro Cipriani. The idea was born during a few conversations with him at the beginning, in the early 2000s, when Alessandro already wrote a book with Riccardo Bianchini, a book on C-Sound, and talking with him, we noticed that Max was becoming very widely used in schools and by artists, and since many years it had audio real-time capabilities. I was very fascinated. I was an compulsive user of Max at the time, and now, still now I am. So we started to think about writing another book, after the book on C-Sound, another book on Max MSP. And we had two main ideas for this book. First of all, it had not to be a book on a programming language, but it had to be a book on synthesis and audio processing. Mm-hmm. And made with Max. So the Max skill, the Max fluency would be a collateral effect for the reader, because the main target was to understand how electronic music works, how the synthesis, the elaboration, and so on. For this reason, we divided, I think we divided each chapter in two parts. The first one is the theoretical part, which is a sort of Max agnostic part. It's not a Max part, it's only the theory. Mm-hmm. And then there is a second part, which is the practical part. And the second idea we had we will refer our reader has to be a musician, not an engineer. So we didn't take anything for granted. We explained everything, little detail, very slowly and going very deep. And so it was a very long work. We started to talk about this in, as I said, in the early 2000s. I think the first patch I wrote for the book were in Max 4. And the book, the first volume, was published in 2008. So a lot of work, a lot of discussion. I think this is the reason why this is so extended. It's a book that goes in so much detail.
Right, but that points to something that is really important. I mean, the name of the book isn't like a book about Max. It's called Electronic Music and Sound Design, and it is true. You put your focus on the sound design and the music parts of it first, and then the use of Max comes second. That's really cool. Now, it sounds like you put a lot of work into this book, so then you decided to make a second book, and it sounds like you're working on a third book.
Yes.
What would make you do that? That sounds like that's heaping difficulties on your head. Okay.
I have to say, the first project was just one book with all the topic we are putting in the first, second, and third volume. But as I said, we wanted to make a book very readable for a musician, for someone which couldn't have a scientific background. So after 4 years, we find us with more than 500 pages already written, and only a fraction of the topics explained in our book. So we stopped for a moment and we said, this is a book of 2,000 pages. I don't know. It's huge. And so, speaking with the publisher, we decided to divide into volumes. The first volume, as you know, is with 4 chapters with a very basic synthesis technique. Second volume, effects and other things, and the third one will be more complex, and we changed I think probably it is interesting that we changed the style of writing from one book to another, because the first book is for a completely beginner, complete beginner. And so it goes very slow and explain everything. The second book is for an intermediate user, so we can go faster, we can go deeper, we can explain more difficult things. For instance, all the dynamic processors, which are very complex patches. And the third one will be for intermediate advanced users, because we know that the reader of the third volume already has read more than 1,400 I don't know pages of Max, so it's probably a sort of expert.
probably can get through the material now, right? That's excellent. Now, also, as part of this, you've mentioned several times that you co-wrote this with Alessandro. How did you first meet up with him, and how did you decide? It seems to me like collaborating on a book project would actually be quite difficult. How did you decide to do this with him, and how has that process gone?
First of all, Alessandro and I are friends since when we were students. And as I said, he already wrote a book that I were proofreading. So we collaborate with his book in the last years of the 90s. And so it was almost natural to go on with Max. And Alessandro has took a more regular studies in electronic music. He is graduated in electronic music. He's a teacher of electronic music, while I am a teacher in composition. So, and I am the Max expert, so to say. So it was natural to divide in this way. Alessandro writes mainly the theoretical chapters, and I write mainly the Max chapter, but everyone read the other one chapters, making changes, suggestion, reviews, and so on. So it's a 400 book, completely 400 book, but he writes mainly the theoretical part, and I the practical one.
I see. I was wondering how you split the work, because otherwise, if everybody is having to do every sentence, that would be very difficult. But that makes a lot of sense given the structure of the book. How do you go about deciding what I would imagine that you start off by saying, I'd like to do everything, and then you end up with 10,000 pages, right? So how do you decide exactly what is the order? Is there a background where, like, either Alessandro or you have some experience teaching some certain things that are helpful, or is it something that you've developed in some other way?
The original order, which is changed in the years, comes from the C-Sound book, which there was an order which was decided for the difficulty of the topics, and we maintained this kind of order. So we started with the very basic synthesis techniques, which are easy to describe and easy to implement in Max. So at the start we have wavetable synthesis, of course, additive synthesis, subtractive synthesis, and LFO and control. And this is the first volume. So it was enough material to go very deep in the electronic music matter, but it wasn't incredibly difficult like it could be, for instance, fast Fourier transform or FM remodulation and so on.
Right.
So this was the first volume. The second volume is a step higher in difficulty. So we have all the sample theory, then the effects, the delay effects, flanger, echo, chorus, and so on, and a very long chapter of the dynamic processors, so compressors, limiter, expander, all recreated in Max, in plain vanilla Max, not using the OMX, how they call the objects. Because for didactical reason is better to recreate a compressor using an envelope follower like a slide or
the basic components, right? Yeah.
Yes, with the basic components. And so this was a complex chapter, but not too complex for an intermediate level. Then we have also in the second volume, we have a chapter on composition, on movement of sonic elements, which is not about synthesis technique, but about the time developing of the music, and then MIDI and Max for Live in the second volume. And the third volume will be for heavy matters like reverb, spatialization, granular synthesis, and granulation. I think I have written more than 100 pages all for granular synthesis at this only for the practical chapter plus the theory. And there will be then distortion, nonlinear techniques like frequency modulation, remodulation, and so on, phase modulation. And then a chapter on analysis and resynthesis, so the fast Fourier transform, convolution. And another important thing is that the third volume is made in Gen. Wherever possible, the patch are in Gen. So there is a first chapter which explains the fundamentals of Gen, and then to create reverb and feedback, phase modulation, and so on, you need Gen. So we introduce Gen, and then we use it extensively. So
that makes a lot of sense, because working with Gen, you can actually explore things at a much more granular level in terms of things like short feedback cycles and all that kind of stuff. That's really cool. So when do you expect the third volume to be completed? I mean, is it years and years away, or is it right around the corner?
First of all, the third volume is our first priority. Now we have to finish the Max 8 version of the two volumes, okay. And I think the third volume will be ready next year. If cycling doesn't decide to come up with Max 9, I hope they won't. I hope you won't. I hope you give us a few time to complete the third volume. So yes, probably next year. Hopefully next year.
Okay. And now, if we turn and look at the Amazing Noises work, first of all, do you collaborate with anyone on that, or is that just you working solo?
For the Max 4 Lite devices, I am working solo. If those devices are published by Ableton, I have a certain amount of exchange with Ableton. They often help me with the layout, because I am not a graphic guy, so they are very very good at this. So, but essentially, it's a work that I do solo with my ideas. I try to put my ideas in a device, so to say.
Now, your devices that you create are super creative and super sophisticated. But I'm always curious when I talk to people who are doing device development like this, how they decide what to do, because there are a million things that you could create.
Yes.
Why do you at some point have to decide to do one at a time? What is it that helps you decide what you're going to do? Do you have a passion about a certain kind of device, or is it the things that the technology makes easily available? Or do you look around for things that are missing?
For the first thing is I try to create plugins that I like, that I have a passion for, that I think it could be interesting for me or for other people. And about the millions of ideas, you are right. It's easy to create a list of possible interesting devices. You can do almost everything. So I have a long list of notes with all my ideas, a catalog of all my ideas, and I review periodically, and I decided to put up some device that I find particularly interesting in this moment, and put down some that maybe it was interesting in the past but no more. And so for instance, when I have to create a new device, I go through my list and I choose one of the first that I have in my list. And this list is the result of a lot of work, of change, of cut and paste, of tweakings, and so on. So it's not difficult to decide what to do, because I have done all the work before, during the months, the previous months, so to say.
When you're doing your own Max programming, do you run across ideas that you just put on the side because you might want to explore them for future devices?
Yes, absolutely. It's a process that happens often. For instance, when I was writing the chapter on reverb, which will be published in the third volume, I create an algorithm, a reverb algorithm based on the delay feedback network, which sounded very good. So I put aside, and then I developed it. And then it is a device in the Ableton store, which is called Outer Spaces. Right. This is the elaboration on one chapter of the third volume. For instance, it's way more complex, the device, with respect to the algorithm in the volume, but the origin is.
But that's the basis, right? Yeah.
The basis is there.
Very interesting. So now you do all of these different things. You're writing, you're teaching, you're doing device development. Now you're playing around with iOS development. Do you even still play music anymore? I would think it sounds to me like you'd be running out of time.
Yes, in fact, this is a bit sad to say, because in the last years I had very few moments to get creative in the compositional sense. I hope I have folders and folders of Max Experiment for composition, for elaboration of creative elaboration of sound, not for devices but for me, and I hope I can do it someday. Probably when the third volume is out, I will slow down and take time to be creative in the production of music.
Sure. When you do music, though, is Max or Ableton Live, or both of them, are they a part of your music making?
I have never composed for Ableton Live, to be honest. I composed, first of all, instrumental music in the past, also for orchestra or groups like string quartet. I made composition with Max and instrument, solo instrument, which is elaborated in processed in real time by Max, and a couple of acousmatic compositions, so tape, so to say. They are made mainly with Max and then edited and with the DAW. I use Logic as a DAW for composition. Probably I will use Ableton in the future, but as I said, since I bought Ableton Live and I started to create plugins, I hadn't time to make nothing new. So
I see
the situation for now.
So while I have you online, I'm very interested in people who do work with like a symphony, but also electronic manipulation. Now, you at the beginning said that when you teach, you are teaching composition with pencil and paper, right?
Yes, or Sibelius or Finale.
Right. But conceptually, it's old-style notation.
Yes.
How do you deal with combining old-style notation with something that's as difficult to document as electronic manipulation of the sound? How do you deal with that?
The documentation is in the score and in the patch. For instance, I wrote a piece for solo vocal and Max. And so the score for the vocalist contains the notes, of course, and some indications to press some buttons at a certain time or move the mouse in a certain position. For instance, the situation of a singer is very easy because the singer has both hands free, so he can use the computer while he's performing.
Right.
And in the score, there are those indications, and then there is a written note for the electronic part and a complete patch, a package with everything you need to perform the piece. I am aware that in the future, maybe a particular piece will not be possible to be executed because computer changes, language changes. Right. So this is, I think, a problem, but I don't think I have a solution for every situation. Probably the best thing is to think of a situation that can last as long as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think you're not unique in worrying about that, because with the march of technology, it also seems like some of the tools for performance are starting to become somewhat antiquated or unavailable, and so paying attention to that is actually pretty key.
Yes.
Well, Maurizio, we're getting close to the end of our time, but before we go, I do want to ask, what's beyond Volume 3 of the book series? What else do you have planned? You obviously have this iOS development that you're doing. Are you also going to be working on some more devices? And is there anything else that's going to come out of your secret laboratory?
Yes, of course. I have. In this moment, I am developing a Max for Live instrument, which I think will be very interesting. It's very complex. It's written almost completely in GenX for the precision, because I need the loops, I need of processing, and I cannot say more at this stage because it's an early stage. But I hope to publish it soonish, and I hope it will be interesting. Then, other than the iOS apps, we are now porting the apps and the devices into VST and audio units. It's an early work we are at the alpha stage at this moment. We are calling people to try what we have done, and last but not least, we are working on some online courses where I teach sound synthesis and audio processing techniques using Max. It will not be a simple adaptation from the books, but something more interactive. I hope I can say more in the future in my pages, so to say. That's it. That's all.
Well, this sounds really fabulous. I want to thank you for sharing this. Now, for people who want to check out your work, where online can they go to view the different things that you do?
First of all, my YouTube channel, which is Maurizio Giri. I think it's easy to find. Then there is the amazingnoises.com site for the devices and the iOS apps, and the contemponet.com for the books. And Contemponet is the publisher for the books.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Well, Maurizio, I want to thank you again for taking the time. It was so fabulous to have this chat with you. But with that, I will let you have the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Likewise.
Bye.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Maurizio for the great talk. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of his book series. Really already looking forward to that third book coming out. If you are interested in learning Max or learning more about Max, there's probably no better place you can go. With this, I'm going to say goodbye for the week. I'm probably, as you listen to this, I'm probably on a plane heading back from Synthplex. Next up for me, getting out of my hidey hole, will be going to the Max Expo up in North Adams, Massachusetts at the end of April. If you're interested in something like that, check it out at cycling74.com/expo. Other than that, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll catch you next time around. Bye.